We return to the Armin Show podcast episodes over 400, knowledge, science, learning more. And on this one, we have a returning guest, Dr. Azra Raza, who has been on before, oncologist, cancer doctor. We have talked about cancer treatment, her original book, The First Cell. Azra, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
I'm glad to have you on. Now, these days I'm doing a thing where I just get right into it. Cancer treatment in 2024. How are we doing? What are you doing in this regard? What may be coming up?
Very exciting things in 2024 and more exciting things coming up in 2025 as well. And it is the earliest realization of the dream I've had for 4 decades, Armin, which is that my contention all these years has been that the only way to treat cancer is to revolutionize early detection. The earlier we find it, the better we can handle it. And it's not just for cancer, but all of healthcare. Prevention should be the best cure. Find it early and fix it early so that you avoid having to deal with end-stage monstrosity. And given that, I'm very excited about what's happening today and what's coming in the future, because instead of relying on annual examinations to detect cancer, like colonoscopies or mammograms or PSAs, etc., people are learning that, in fact, we need to treat the human body as a machine and continuously monitor it 24/7 for any appearance of disease-caused perturbations.
I've noticed this in many different categories ever since your material. Whatever it is, it could be a tooth issue, it could be a health issue, it could be a social issue with a friend, any sort of issue that takes place. There's an early part where things are very easily managed, and sometimes something is noticed. There's a signal, there's some sort of signal in some way, and then if that early part is skipped, it starts to get a little bit louder, and it's not as easy to handle. And if it keeps going further, this starts to add to another thing. It's like a room that gets jumbled with a bunch of items, and then at that point, oh, it's too much, and now you have to make a huge effort or bring somebody else to take care of the room. It has become large, but it wasn't originally large and didn't have to be that way, where things add up. Where did you originally come to that point that we don't want to get to a future stage?
But I have to ask you this. If it's so obvious what you are saying, in every situation in life, especially in politics, for example, all the wars that we engage in could have been prevented, really, had we taken up care of the problems earlier. Then my question to you, and you have interviewed 400 people on your podcast, what is the reason that we don't act upon this common sense thing? You tell me.
Well, I will come up with 3 answers. This is good.
Okay.
I don't often get it. Number 1, because when it's small, it seems like something not so substantial. Oh, this can be put off till later. There's other bigger issues to do. Maybe it'll go away on its own. And so it's left, which is never the function. Nothing just goes away on its own. That's like if something just moved out of nowhere for no reason without us actually moving it. Force requires acceleration in some way, or else there's no change in movement. And then another item would be, oh, there's probably tools for when it gets really large, which is a terrible way to think about things, but when it gets to be a very large issue, we can tackle that, but you don't know what it's going to be like at that point. So that's an assumption, because right now it is manageable. Maybe then it's not. So that assumption is faulty. And then the last one I would say is maybe the not noticing of it in detail, like this is an actual issue, and looking at it like just part of life, but nothing is just part of life. That's 3 answers I'd bring up to that.
And those are all very reasonable answers. However, the missing thing in all those answers is that, yeah, that was all these things applied 50 years ago. But then why especially in the last 30 years, why are we not waking up and taking off the blinders from our eyes to see that all those three things are not applicable here? The fact is that in cancer, the mortality from cancer has come down by 1% a year, so that in the last 3 decades, it has come down by 33%. But most of it is because of anti-smoking, anti-obesity campaigns and early detection improvements, and some from treatments. I mean, breast cancer, for example, is a very different story, that even stage 4 breast cancers, the women are living longer and longer because of the sequential treatments that can be given to them. But at the cost of what? Physical, financial, and then eventually dying anyway. 44,000 women dying a year in the US from breast cancer. Not one should be dying, is my point. So the fact is, everybody should be able to see that it is better to find it early, because finding it late has not helped. But we are somehow not doing that.
There's a lack of vision in that regard. And I do notice this in many categories, that the general public is narrow-minded in most categories, or maybe the research scientists can even be narrow-minded in some categories. And so something that may seem obvious, well, that's not priority number 1, 2, or 3 on the list. But now that we have much better detection mechanisms and continuous detection, like you said, 24/7, which was not applicable 100 years ago, 50 years ago, then it starts to get ridiculous, whereas before it would not be as ridiculous because those tools weren't in place. And then it needs proponents of that to push it forward in some regard, so the response is better.
Yeah, I mean, think of it that in 2024, we are relying on a physician to put in a colonoscopy tube and look for cancer somewhere. By the time they can actually see it, that little tumor already has hundreds and hundreds of millions of cells, which will require slash, poison, or burn, or slash for sure, plus minus the others. And so when AI has reached such amazing stages today, that ChatGPT can answer any questions for me, when we are landing on Mars, why are we still relying on visualizing a tumor? I don't understand. You know why? Because we are not putting enough resources to develop those technologies that have been available. We are not using them. We are not putting enough resources, because even at the rate we are progressing now, with the resources committed to early detection, it will take another decade or two before we can actually start to find real early cancers. And there's no reason for it. We can do it in 2 years or even a year if we put in the right resources in the right places. Sorry
There's
for
no,
this philosophical discussion, but it is a very important one, because until and unless we change our minds, things will not happen in 2025 as fast as they should. And this is why I'm so insistent upon continuing this part of the conversation, that anyone listening to this podcast needs to know that minds have to change first, and not just the mind of researchers, the mind of the public. The public needs to be demanding more and better things.
is there something to it that, like, let's say slashing out a cancer is very easy to conceptualize, and those kinds of things are always continued for decades because car has the issue, something very obvious, repair that visually, whereas what you're describing is less visual, more conceptual, and there's less people that are tangibly supportive or dealing with conceptual ideas, and so it gets more friction than something that's like, there's this thing, we're going to cut it out, there's this thing, we're going to burn it or poison it in some way. It doesn't get the kind of support I've always noticed that in life, that it seems like conceptual items get this much support, and then visual or very clearly seen items get this much support. But these always show up later. They never go away. These are more relevant than later. These are the important laws that we use, and these were just like a brute force short-term solution of the time.
Yeah, I think that's a very sane and a very smart explanation. I agree, along with all the other ones. And one I'd like to add to that is that the two groups of people who could actually take risks to do it are either the younger researchers or the older ones. The problem with younger researchers, why they can't chart out a new path, is because that requires taking risks, and they can't. And taking a risk means you could lose, and they can't afford to lose because their salaries depend on it. And they have to make a career right now. So they need to keep doing whatever they were mentored to do rather than chart out a new course. And for the older people, if they've been doing the same thing for 30 years, they don't even know how to do the next one. They're like Luddites. And so they can't even afford to take a chance. Those are the issues that our society has entered such a lethargy. I mean, the society of researchers, academics, institutions, any aspect of cancer research or treatment is suffering from broken institutions, Paleolithic emotions, and godlike technologies that we don't know how to apply properly. This is the issue that we are dealing with, and it's a very serious issue that I have been spending the last 15, 20 years speaking about it continuously, writing books, doing all kinds of talks and podcasts and giving speeches and grand rounds, etc., to try and shake the field up. Of course, I failed to do it.
We don't agree here at Human Central that you have failed to do it, but I like your comment. Two comments you brought up there. One, Paleolithic emotions. That's true. I think about that in many categories. That's a big one right there. It's like you're stuck in. We're still doing the biochemical response from 5,000 years ago, 3,000, whatever, however many years ago, to things, but we're so much further ahead. Why are we still? It's like we're stuck in a past time. That's one. And then two, I like that you bring that up. The young individuals, it's already set for them, so okay, I'll do that for my job, and it's not my place to make some sort of change or decision, so that's not going to lead to risk-taking and innovation. And then the older individuals you're describing, well, we've done this for a long time, and we don't really make changes out here, so this is what's worked, and I built a whole framework based on this, so not much change is going to come from there. Where does change generally come from? How does it show up? What kind of person is necessary for that?
Well, the person who has skin in the game. And who has skin in the game of cancer? The patient. The problem is the patients, when they are not patients, when they're the public, they're being deluded into thinking that we have great answers. Every other day you see some headline. Cure for pancreatic cancer, cure for brain cancer, and in fine print it says in mice. But who reads the fine print? The public is reading those big headlines and feeling quite complacent and feeling reassured that, there are answers. Doctors are working hard and finding solutions, and billions of dollars are going into research, surely, until they or a loved one near them gets cancer. And then they go and find out all the harsh realities. Think of it, Armin, that 42% people, now it's 47% actually, 47% individuals who are diagnosed with cancer every year. That means half of the people diagnosed with cancer lose every penny of their life savings by the second year. That means it's affecting, not only bringing them to a financial collapse, it's also affecting their next generation. How horrible is that? But are patients really aware of it beforehand, that this is what it's going to cost? Even if they are the lucky ones who get cured, that the cost is going to be prohibitive. formidable, financially ruins them. Those are the issues that we have, as a society, failed to address.
It's an important category you're bringing up. This has been in the discussion quite recently, and it's substantial. So if something happens healthcare wise, the response, it'll affect the individual. They might get cured, they might not, but the financial hit is like a game ender for quite a few people. And then that was it. It was unplanned. It's like when you see an accident on the freeway, it seems like, oh, there's an accident and this is what happened. But clearly those people in the morning didn't plan, oh, at 10:44 I'm going to have an accident. It was unplanned. Now their whole week, maybe year, you never know, is affected because of that brief moment. Same thing with what you're describing here. It's like this shock factor earthquake. People are concerned about things like an earthquake or a hurricane, but actually something from inside, such as cancer, is way more of a shock factor because, oh, I'm not prepared. Oh, this happened. Oh, I'll go there. Oh, the costs are like this. It's kind of late in the process. We don't have the resources, and now everybody around me has to pull together to barely respond to this. It's a bit late at that time.
You know, just the way we talked about how early detection for everything in life is important, and taking care of it when it's not become this horrible problem. The same way, I have another general principle I'd like to share with you. Somebody asked Oscar Wilde once, how did you lose all your money? You know what he said? Gradually, gradually, and then all of a sudden. See, this is what happens. Things are happening gradually, gradually around us. We keep ignoring them, until suddenly that cataclysmic event happens, and then everything is over, basically. And so I feel that we are on the verge of this all of a sudden, at least in early cancer detection. And so let's talk about something positive. I really think that the solution for cancer is very much on the horizon now. But the solution is not going to come from finding new treatments, but from finding new ways of detecting it early when it can be fixed, even by changing your lifestyle. Or even taking a drug like Ozempic could affect it. Even taking, just bringing your fat cells under control through Ozempic could affect early detection. And so I do think that that very much with great anticipation that the next year or two are going to be game changers, really. And I knew that you were going to ask me this question, so I have shown this in grand rounds that I gave at Columbia University, because where I work at Columbia University, Armin, honestly, we have some of the best minds in the world. I feel so fortunate every day of my life that not only am I living in America, but I am working at a university where the kind of intellectual prowess that they have all assembled together is something that humanity should be proud of. And not just Columbia. I mean, many universities are like this and many academic centers. I just happen to be here. And I say that the biomedical engineers at Columbia, specifically two of them I'd like to mention, Ken Shepard and Samuel Sia, both professors of biomedical engineering, have been basically pushing the envelope and ahead of the curve for the last couple of decades. And I've had the fortune of working with both of them for 10 years, and almost 10 years now. And it's amazing where they have brought this field to. And I'd like to share something that they have made already possible in certain ways. And this is the kind of thing I'm talking about as a solution of cancer. And this is what the biomedical engineers have developed. The solution is not in the syringe, but it is in the needle. What could be in the needle? In the needle is a device that is implantable, which can be injected through this needle into a blood vessel. And it unfolds there. And inside a blood vessel it creates an electrical field. And so anything that crosses that electrical field causes impedance of the electrical current. And that electrical impedance is detected and recorded on a chip, little computer that's built inside that device. And with a little ultrasound patch from outside, they can communicate with this device inside the body. So think about it now. A cancer cell is much larger than a normal blood cell. And these giant cells, which are detectable at the start of, for sure, recurrence of cancer, whether they are detectable early enough remains to be seen because we are not paying attention to that stage of cancer. But it can be these giant cells, which are like, if a normal blood cell is, say, 15 microns in size, these giant cells can be up to 300 microns. So they're really giant cells. When they pass through the electrical current in this blood vessel, it can be detected immediately, and we can be alerted that a giant cell has been detected. Not only that, you could signal through that same device that zap and electrocute that giant cell. The kinds of things that are possible. But this may not become possible to be implanted for 10 years unless we have the resources to do it. So all the time we spend in applying for grants, which for early detection are few and far between. Those are the problems. But the solutions are at least visible on the horizon. So if your theory is correct that something tangible, something visible, something physical will get more attention than an abstract idea, well, here it is. Armin, show it to your audience and tell them to demand that this is something that needs to be done now.
It's a valid point. What kinds of concerns come up when it is brought up? Is it friction for a new idea? What kinds of difficulty come up when you bring something like this forth?
It's always resources. It's all about the money. You know that. So where is the money going? 90% to 95% is still being spent on developing treatments for end-stage diseases and research on that disease once it has become established. You see, what I'm saying is the following. The only good news you can give a cancer patient when you make the diagnosis is we found it early. Early means the earliest we can detect, we call it stage 1 disease. But even stage 1, as I said, will require some form of slash, poison, or burn, and that is horrible. That will again go ahead and cause all the financial and physical burdens to patients. So what I have been proposing and strongly recommending all these decades is that we need to find cancer earlier than stage 1. We need to find it at the first cell stage of cancer. What is the first cell stage? Because a cancer cell doesn't arise randomly out of the blue. First, the stage has to be set for it. Because what is a cancer cell? It's a normal cell that's going to misbehave. Well, why should it misbehave? It's not something internal usually that's turned on, but it's something that prepared the microenvironment for it. What are those stressful conditions that are forcing the cells to fight or flight, develop a strategy to survive or die? And in that desperation of trying to develop a strategy to survive, one of these is cells fused together to double their armaments, everything that they have inside the cell by fusing gets doubled. So that could be the giant cell we are talking about. But we need to do all the work to prove all this over and over. Why aren't we doing it is the problem. So I'm very excited and very optimistic that this will happen, but I still want to underscore this idea over and over that the rest depends on people listening to this podcast. How fast can it happen? Will your children be safe from cancer or not? Will you be safe from cancer? Look at all the young people getting cancer today. And just this morning, I read the headline that all these incidents of colon cancer appearing in 30 and 40-year-olds suddenly, could it be because of COVID? Some long-term effects of this virus. We don't know what it does to the immune system. So pandemics like this can have long-term consequences. All this requires proper studies, but the problem is that in 2023, for example, 1,423 phase 1 trials were done in cancer. Last year, 1,423. The failure rate was 87%. And if you add phase 2 and 3 to it, then 95% clinical trials in cancer fail. You know what is the cost of this failure, Armin? $60 billion. I come from a very poor country, Pakistan. We have a population of 230 million. The entire budget for the whole country is $34 billion. Here we are throwing $60 billion down the drain, chasing these phantoms of magic bullets for cancer, treatment, end-stage disease, and hurting everybody, hurting the country, hurting the healthcare system, hurting the patients, hurting their next generation. But we are not willing to put in even $50 million. We're ready to throw 60 billion, but not 50 million into early detection. It just makes no sense. But this is what frailties of human nature are.
It made me think of a few analogies. That's how my mind usually goes to things. But in various categories, there's so much energy on the item of, let's say, profit. If it was like in the internet application space, you could actually address people's internal lack of well-being. Or instead of doing that, you could spend who knows how much to get investments and such to build this app, that app, that app, that app, and compete in the app space to get people's attention, when actually there was an underlying issue that was larger, but it's not profitable because it's not as profitable as the big problem, because the big problem is something you can say, hey, this costs this much. It's a big problem. We're going to resolve this huge problem that you have. You have metastatic cancer, so we will try to resolve it, but it's going to cost basically your whole city. Whereas if it is found at, there are 3 cells, and we cleared out those 3 cells, and that didn't happen. Well, how do we put some huge charge on that resolution? It's hard sell. It's a hard sell in a land of selling. So I think that is a portion of it. Those items that really matter don't tend to get tackled. And then once it's a huge issue, somebody shows up like, hi, I can help with that really huge issue. And wait a minute, but why don't you want to help with the earlier part? We don't do that. We don't do that. Yeah. How do you get prioritization on that? It has to be communicated to the general people, because businesses won't be in support of that kind of item. It's a hard sell. Wait, we prevented the thing that would have cost your whole life savings at this point. But then the person will say, how do I know that? How do I know that was going to cost my whole life saving? Well, it would have, but we would have had to wait 12 years for damage to be done. I don't know, so I won't. How do you counter that force right there?
I think I have 2 answers for you. The first is something that Henry Ford said, actually. He said that in 1909, he said, if I had asked my customers what do they want, they would have said a faster horse. But I gave them a car. In other words, by the time customers demand something from you, it's too late. We should have been doing this before the customers are being asked to ask us, like I'm asking, for the public to get involved. It's because of our failure that the public needs to be involved. We should have, as experts in the field, we should have been telling the customers what they want. And we have not been able to do that. So the other thing, how to change this whole area is, I'll give you an example. Thomas Kuhn, a great, uh, his book is a great book called The Structure of Scientific Revolution. He was really a philosopher. This book came out in the 1960s, but something like I read once every 2-3 years because it's so good. And the lesson of the book is very simple. You don't like the current paradigm for something. You have problems with it. You have a new paradigm. Well, the only way to get rid of the old one is show the success of the new one. In other words, when the word processor came along, who cares about improving the ribbon of the typewriter? Something so dramatically different comes along that it replaces the whole paradigm, old one, by itself. When a car came, who was worried about building a horseshoe better? When the word processor comes, no one worries about the typewriter. When the kind of things that I'm talking about, where, for example, I'll give you another example that our bodies seem to be cooperating with us pretty well because they have a good repair toolkit that we come with. For the first 50, 60, even up to 70 years, they cooperate and work very well. We have little problems, the body fixes them. But then after that, suddenly old age strikes and all these chronic diseases come in like rushed at you. Your eyesight is going, your hearing is going, you can't get up and move easily because of arthritis. You get demented, you get cancer, you get diabetes and heart disease and pulmonary problem. All hell breaks loose. Peter Attia calls this the marginal decades, where everything seems to happen suddenly. The point I'm making is that yes, we have a finite lifespan, we are going to die, but perhaps we could compress the morbidities that come with that marginal decade. And one of the most important and existentially important one of these is cancer, because dementia may not kill you, cancer will kill you immediately if you don't take care of it. And so I'm saying that we need as a society of scientists and researchers and doctors and anyone involved in this area, pharmaceutical industry, etc., have to understand that all of us will be served better if we try to really find the problems or develop tools to find and detect the problems earlier and try to keep fixing them.
I've noticed this theme of what you're bringing up there. Ford and Steve Jobs said similar about making products. You have to be ahead of the person and giving people what they're not even looking for. And also, you don't get the response immediately. At first, you get pushback. You get all the difficulty, frankly. If you're the person who has the idea that it's worthwhile, you'll get, no, that's not how we've done things. By the time people actually do things that new way, you were there like for 15 years saying, really, this was that person. And then eventually it's one of the amazing things, and then people look back and say, wow, that person was a superstar. But they didn't get the superstar type feel for the first however long, or sometimes during their whole existence with like long ago individuals. So
no, not so long ago. I'm a living example. Now when it works, it will be somebody else's idea. No one will remember that for 30 years I was saying this. And that's okay. As long as the solution is found, that's fine. That's not the reason I'm not doing these things to be remembered or to be given any credit. It's because of what I see 30 to 40 cancer patients a week. I'm the one on that field taking care of these patients every day. And for me, this is a real issue. This is not something that's happening out there.
Made me think also, by the way, there's a musical performer that said a concept of let's not be the ones to think it should be for ourselves, but what we can leave for others. And he's one of the well known individuals too. So there's a theme that the individuals that are highly regarded have this criteria of thinking, but there's a hit. I don't know, there's always a hit that's involved in that process. How can, are there other, who else is involved in getting this spread or applied in some way?
I think, Armin, that really we need to bring the patient in every single time. I really think it is so important that somehow science has become too far removed, especially medicine. It is a very social science, and yet we have distanced it from emotions deliberately. I was taught by my mentors in America that never get involved emotionally with the patient because emotions cloud judgments and you may make a wrong decision for them if your emotions are involved. On the other hand, I feel just the opposite. That unless your emotions are involved, unless you feel empathy, because that's what the patient demands, empathy, understanding from their doctor, a sense that they are getting it, that how much you're suffering, what your anguish is all about. Unless we appreciate that aspect, we won't be able to help the patient properly. And so it's like Emily Dickinson, beautifully, she says this. And I think of these lines often when I'm dealing with my patients. I measure every grief I meet with analytic eyes. I wonder if it weighs like mine or has a different size. I wonder if they had it long or did it just begin. I cannot find the date of mine. It's been so long a pain. I wonder if it hurts to live and if they have to try, and whether could they choose between, they would not rather die. Somehow, this human aspect of suffering, anguish, pain, and mortality have all been removed from our discussions because the whole culture is a winning culture, win, win, win. And death is not a winning option. But death is something we have to deal with. What we are saying is how to have a dignified and an easier death. You know, Armin, 99% patients I ask this, are you afraid to die? Most of them will say, no, we are afraid of the suffering that leads to it. We don't want to become invalids, and we don't want to have pain. You know, those are the things that are very human issues. And how to change the whole thing is to bring back the matrix of success, how success is measured in society. We need to have dialogues that are going to take not just such a separation between Athens and Jerusalem, reason and passion, but to seamlessly bring the two back together and take into account all of these things in order to reach a decision about what type of research should be done, what interventions are best for the patients, etc. But it brings me to another point, Armin, that humanity has not been able to solve any of the most obvious issues. Give you an example, love. What is the solution for love? If you read all the novels and fiction and see all this practical marriages falling apart, it's the worst possible thing. Love never brings any permanent meaning. It is a journey into resolution. The calm of consummation, even if it comes for a moment, is not going to last forever. And yet, We have not been able to decide what kind of what method should we use to choose a partner. Should be an arranged marriage? Should be a marriage of this nature or that? Should we live together for 10 years before deciding to get married, or just get married and start living together? I mean, nobody knows how to answer this. And to take it on a larger basis, how to live in a society. Every order we have come up with, monarchy, oligarchy, communism, socialism, democracy, liberalism, they've all fallen down. Look at the way democracy is being torn to pieces all over the globe right now. It's becoming the tyrannical rule of the mobs can take over suddenly. And that's not the most ideal solution either. So we have such frail natures that we are unable to solve these larger issues at all. And this is a very large issue. How do we win success? What do we call a winning game in cancer research? What is winning in healthcare? Winning is not to somehow act as if death is never going to happen or mortality is not a reality. Winning is accepting all of that and making it easier to reach that end point. But I don't see those kinds of things being discussed even at all.
Strong point of category there. Very important. This winning concept, I always used to have an issue with the term result, and then later with winning and the way it was described, because that would be the baseline, and then people would do things on top of this baseline of this is that. Okay, so then you made the scoreboard that, and now you got 50 points of that. But we're not looking at why that's the thing. So I was never a fan of that, or certain kinds of result. Like, okay, you got this result, but 14 years later, things are not looking great in this capacity. So what was that result? I guess that was a pretend item. And then I was pointed at for not having that thing, but it wasn't a real thing. So imagine like saying, oh, anybody who has 500 headphones is a winner. And then I'm like, oh, I have to start saving up to buy headphones. 10 years later, it doesn't matter. And I lost my money. And I got made fun of. Like, it's multiple losses for something that doesn't make sense. So then it's important that the people who have the emotional and the analytical sense both can set some guidelines of what is a result or what to accept first.
No, what is the matrix for success? Right now, young doctors training with me come back and tell me that when they are going out to interview for permanent jobs once their training is finished, you know the kinds of questions they are asked. For example, one guy was asked, well, where do you want to publish? In New England Journal of Medicine or in Nature? If you want to publish in New England Journal of Medicine, you have to work with a clinician and go and work with so-and-so. If you want to publish in Nature, you have to work with basic scientists, go work and so-and-so. In other words, the goal of your life is going to be to publish a paper in Nature or New England Journal of Medicine. What happened to curing cancer? This is the kind of thing that shatters me completely. Our whole semantics have become so corrupted.
What a good point right there. Right. Because later on, okay, that's such a conversion of what the actual thing was. It's the same thing like family structure and leading to next generations. If you make it not about family but about this other thing, okay, now we don't have next generations. Or if you make it about getting into nature, great, I guess now people build up skills to get into Nature magazine, which is a magazine, but the whole point of Nature in the first place was to represent what is occurring in the background and technologically forward.
Yeah.
When you make the thing, which is a sub part, the actual thing,
yes,
I think it gets goofy in very short time.
Yeah. Instead of, no one even talks about curing cancer anymore. It's all about prolonging survival by a few months.
Missed the concept. I always like to bring this up. Mm-hmm.
By the way, I talked about experimental trials. Why are they so popular? Because if you put one patient on an experimental trial at any academic institution right now, you know how much money putting that one patient will bring to the institution? Anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000. That's a lot of money. So when these young doctors are going out to interview, that's another question they're commonly asked. How many clinical trials will you open if we take you at our university? Just opening a clinical trial will, just having this record that they have gained some experience as part of their training in these number of clinical trials, makes them desirable candidates. Not that those clinical trials, 95% of them failed and the 5% that succeeded should have failed because they prolonged survival by a couple of months. That's not even brought up. The only question is how many trials will you bring? Because it's all about monetizing and commercializing and financially gaining everything. And that, to me, that's the other important aspect. Not only are the guidelines for success so pathetic right now, and the goals we are mentoring our young people to aim for are completely obscene, in my opinion. Not only that, but the kind of financial greed and that whole monopolization and monetization of everything painful for humans has become the kind of the leading principle right now. And it all has to be questioned and changed. And the only way to do it, as I said, is to show success of the new model, that doing things differently does make a difference.
That is the only way. I thought of different series of items I've been through. I was part of like the blogging grouping of 2008, 9, 10, 11. There was a lot of short-term monetization practices that showed up, and then 10 years later, they're nowhere to be found. It wasn't a thing. That was just for like a 1 year, let's sell some products, and it didn't really mean anything. Whereas the people who were saying something that meant something, but they were less popularly noted, 15 years later, they're still saying something that means something.
Yeah.
And it might be more popular, but those short-term things, they don't
There's
have the
another
weight.
issue here, Armin. I want to point this out with a concrete example. Let's say, and this is true, it happens to me. Let's say I worked with a company X, and I said to them that, look, I'm treating a disease called myelodysplastic syndromes. This is a pre-leukemia, and 30% of these patients will go ahead and develop leukemia. But 70% will die of their disease, MDS. It's not that only those 30% who develop leukemia will die. Most of my patients will die, but some will die within 3 months or 6 months, and some will not die for 15 years. The current way we have of distinguishing between, do you have a lower risk of dying or a higher risk of dying? You know, it costs, we have to do blood counts, bone marrow aspirates, biopsies, genetic analysis, cytogenetic analysis, flow cytometry, 1,000 tests that cost $30,000 and above, plus painful bone marrow procedures on patients. With all of this, we come up with a risk factor for a patient that is literally accurate 50% of the time. In other words, it's like tossing a coin. Despite all this, $30,000 pain to the patient, and then like flipping a coin. Okay, so I went to this company X and I said, I have this tissue repository of thousands of samples I have collected on my patients for 35 years. If you do your particular test on these serial samples, we may be able to come up with a solution for the finding accurately the risk of this patient dying more accurately from a few drops of blood then all those tests and everything together. So the company agrees, let's say they work with me, and we do come up with a test that's costing less than $1,000, only from a few drops of blood. And now, when we were using the old system, all we could tell patients was, hey, you have lower risk disease. Then the patient would ask me, Dr. Raza, what does a lower risk disease mean? Does it mean that you tell me I have MDS, I have a lower risk, lower chance of dying? What does that mean? Should I complete my bucket list now? Or can I plan for 3 years from now when my grandson is going to graduate from college? I have no way of telling him this. I'll say, no, you could die within 1 year, or you could survive for 10 years. I can't tell him because 50-50 chance. Anything can happen. But using this test from the blood, we can not only find as accurately as the scoring system is doing, at least, we can personalize it for the individual. Isn't this perfect, Armin? That now we have a test from the blood instead of those 1,000 tests, including the bone marrow. We can do it for less than $1,000 instead of over $30,000, and we can individualize and personalize the risk for you, the patient sitting in front of me. But you know why I can't take it forward, even though we have it? Because the company is suddenly met with a financial disaster. And they may fold over, and they have no time to spend in this unexplored asset. What do you do now? I've used up my samples to look for this. I looked for it. I found it. What do? The IP doesn't belong to me. It belongs to them. These are the issues we are dealing with in a system where that whole risk-taking has become so corrupted that everyone is willing to invest money in an enterprise that has a 95% chance of failing, like in clinical trial, rather than doing in something like I'm proposing. That if a patient comes to me who's 65 years old and I diagnosed MDS on them, and they have a risk of dying within a year or after 10 years, and I can accurately tell them so they can plan their life, that's not as important. These are the issues that we deal with every day in my clinic.
It has a it has a little bit of that feeling of 95% failure, but this is how we've done things, so there's no risk or accountability or responsibility taken. Like, we've done it this way, and it fails a lot, and hey, it's not me, and higher ups are good with it. Whereas if you take some sort of risk, but it's way better, but there's a chance you took a risk, so there's some sort of responsibility and accountability that we don't deal with. If we just follow what's been happening, nobody can pinpoint us. But if we don't follow what's been happening, somebody can point it at us for a little bit. It can be uncomfortable for a day or a week, and that stops progress. That's rough. Yeah, I think about these things. There's a lot of patterns that people follow that I'm very attuned to, and then people do it, and then companies will do it, and even the cells, the way we're describing the cells will do the same thing as how a cancer cell develops, is how somebody who maybe becomes a dangerous individual, we'll call that stage 4. They weren't that at the beginning. There were steps to take, nobody took into account. There's a lack of care or concern or emotional resonance, and then so it goes up, and then by the time it's late, we invest in that thing, but now there's like a school violence or something, and then we have this huge response, and it costs a lot, and what can we do about it? But if there was care early on in the whole system, it would not have gotten to there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yesterday I was giving a talk to the first-year fellows at Columbia University, HEMOG fellows. They've just finished their residencies and starting their fellowship, and so we give these, whole courses to them. So I was speaking to them. It turns out that one of the fellows, who's a first-year fellow at Columbia now, his father was my fellow, who sadly died of pancreatic cancer. And when his father was a fellow with me 40 years ago, the treatment I was using is exactly the treatment I'm using today for acute myeloid leukemia, with the same dreadful results. Since yesterday, I can't get the picture of these father and son out of my head. That shame on me that I have not been able to do anything for these patients in all these years, Armin. Honestly, I feel like shooting myself. What a failure. I don't know how to account for this. You tell me why. I don't know.
Well, I would account for it first by thinking the person who is cognizant of that is very valuable and important, and it is not. I don't look at it as a failure in the same way, but I get what it would cause, because you would think that many years, that effect, why is it the same procedure? Have we gotten more advanced? I guess not in that regard.
No,
And why are
and
we not
40
treating
years
beforehand?
ago, when I was treating acute myeloid leukemia, and his father was a fellow with me, that's when it had occurred to me that in my lifetime, this disease will not be cured. So I said to myself, what is the only good news? Early detection. How do you detect acute myeloid leukemia early? Because by the time you detect it, billions of cells are all over your blood and bone marrow. The only way to detect it early is in people who don't have it yet, but who are at high risk of getting it, and follow them. This is why I changed the whole trajectory of my research from acute myeloid leukemia alone to going after people at high risk of acute myeloid leukemia, which is myelodysplastic syndromes or pre-leukemia, and following them to try and intercept before they become that deadly disease. And even that hasn't happened for me in 40 years. Why? Because it turns out that pre-leukemia that I was calling, and everyone is calling to this day pre-leukemia, is a cancer by itself, because that also kills. As I told you earlier, it's not necessary for these people to develop acute leukemia to die. They can die of MDS just from lowering of blood counts. We can't give them enough transfusions and they die from that. So the issue that has been haunting me since yesterday is what do we do as a society? What do we do as individuals living in this society? When I look back on my career, what have I done wrong? Where have I failed so badly that I'm unable to convince other people of this idea that let's try to find the disease early? They dismiss me by saying, yeah, we know that. We already know that. Early detection is early. Let's move on.
Two strong points here. One, I've noted this many times. The individuals that I would describe of as not effective or functional for our general society, we do this clapping and there's a high support. And then the individuals that really have the things and see the actual items like you saw 40 years ago, I have questions like you're saying, like, how have I failed? This feels terrible. It's always inverted. Life is always inverted. And the individual, that one will always, I've always been unentertained by that, because it should be the other way around. But then it causes you to ask those kinds of questions. And the other point is, you saw it. Whenever there's something in life, when you see it like that 40 years ago, you're like, this is a path. This will lead to this. You envision it. This will have no solution. It has to be found beforehand. It's confirmed. And if it's something like that that's very binary, that's it. You saw it, and then trying to explain that to others. It's like seeing an asteroid coming at Earth, and you did the math, and you're like, oh, it's gonna make its way in 2042. I did the math. That's confirmed. And then you just spend time trying to tell people, like, it's on the way, and then they're over there like, we're focusing on other things. Okay, but I want you to know, I don't know how to tell you more clearly. It's a little bit frustrating, like you're describing.
Beautifully said. I wish I had said that.
It's just showing up.
Yeah, exactly.
Things in life, I always see an inverted item like that. The individual who does the short-term thing that is not relevant is somehow celebrated, clapped for, and gets some short-term benefits or medium-term, and then the individual that has a long-term point that is strong gets difficulty in the short term. So sometimes things are okay in the medium term, and then maybe in the long term, or who knows how far away, they're like, oh,
Yeah,
that was a
look,
great
this
point.
would be acceptable as long as human lives weren't involved. But not being clapped for and not being considered a success is not the same in my field, because in my field it means millions of people are dying painful deaths and becoming financially ruined.
Right. It's a strong point. One thing I always like to check, very passionate point, frankly, what is a closing message at the current moment you would want to leave those who can sense abstract concepts with to take for their thinking?
Look, my message is always the same, that we only have one duty in life as humans, all of us. Our ultimate purpose should be to try and reduce the suffering of humanity in whatever way we can. That is my message to everybody. Whether it's you are trying to do it in one way, I'm trying to do it in another, some teacher is trying to teach some students and trying to do it in a different way, that is our ultimate duty. And we need to constantly ask ourselves, are we being faithful to this mission that we have been given? And the only satisfaction one can get in life is that we do not question our goal and we do not question our commitment to that goal. That is my strongest message. Set an impossible goal for yourself to achieve the possible. And then give it your all and give it so much that you are not ashamed before dying that, oh, I didn't give it my all. If you fail, that's a different story. Don't question your goal and don't question your own investment in that goal. That would be a success for me.
What a strong point.
And can I end with an Emily Dickinson poem?
That would be great. We would appreciate that.
Because for me, one of the most difficult things is always talking to patients and giving them the bad news. And helping them navigate through the difficult times. These are the real duties of an oncologist. And Emily Dickinson has helped me so much, but this one short thing by her. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. See, the admonition in the first line is you have to tell the truth, but do it properly. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. Too bright for our infirm delight, the truth's superb surprise. Like lightning to the children, eased with explanations kind, the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind.
That is beautiful and has a strong message right there. Long live Emily Dickinson. Dr. Raza, I would like to thank you for having joined on this discussion, coming back onto the program and sharing quite a bit about the cancer field research and quite a bit of philosophy as well.
Thank you for having me, and I hope to be back next year with better news.
That would be great. Glad to have you on. And we are out.